darkness falls over the Malayan jungle in early 1942 as Imperial Japan's forces sweep through Southeast Asia. A shadowy figure emerges from the tree line. Making a strange bird call sound, he carefully positions a stick of bamboo against a Japanese-controlled railway bridge. As the mysterious man disappears, the homemade gelignite inside the bamboo explodes in a deafening blast, sending the bridge crashing into the river below. In the past 2 weeks, these attacks have claimed hundreds of lives and wreaked havoc on infrastructure. The Japanese command is convinced they face a force of 200 battle-hardened commandos. In the hostile depths of the rainforest, British naturalist and former schoolteacher turned guerrilla wildman Captain Freddie Spencer Chapman and his small band of fighters will now face the wrath of 2,000 Imperial soldiers, if the jungle itself doesn't get them first. Freddie Spencer Chapman was born in London on May 10, 1907. His mother passed away shortly after his birth, and during World War I, his father was one of over 1 million troops who lost their lives at the Battle of the Somme, leaving Freddie and his brother in the care of an elderly clergyman and his wife in a remote village in northern England's Lake District. As an orphan, Chapman was forced to become self-reliant from a young age. With little interest in the monotony of school life, he preferred to spend hours alone, exploring the rugged landscapes nearby, developing a strong interest in plants and animals. Reflecting on his childhood, Chapman would later say he was, first a mad, keen butterfly collector, then a wildflower enthusiast, and at last, a bird watcher. He developed a deep knowledge of the natural world and taught himself navigation and endurance. He learned to move silently through difficult terrain, to read weather patterns, to navigate by stars, and perhaps, most importantly, to rely on his own judgment. During the 1930s, the young naturalist sought more and more ambitious expeditions that pushed him to his absolute limits. While on a trip to the Greenlandic Arctic, he lost all the nails from his fingers and toes to the bitter cold, spent 20 harrowing hours fighting for survival in a storm-tossed kayak, and once saved himself from a deep crevasse by clutching the handles of his dog sled as he fell. In the Himalayas, he performed the first-ever ascent of the 24,000-foot mountain Chomolhari, a feat that would not be repeated for over 3 decades. In 1938, Chapman took a teaching position at Gordonstown School, with a young Prince Philip among his students. However, with war in Europe looking increasingly likely, he decided his experience could be put to better use elsewhere, joining the Seaforth Highlanders Regiment of the British Army in June 1939. With World War II breaking out 3 months later, Chapman was quickly identified as an ideal candidate for special operations. The military recognized that his unique skill set, a combination of physical endurance, fieldcraft, and the ability to operate independently in harsh conditions, made him perfect for the type of unconventional warfare they anticipated would be necessary. Initially, Chapman was dispatched to Australia to train their forces in guerrilla tactics. By 1941, he had joined Special Training School 101 in Singapore, a secretive organization tasked with preparing for the possibility of Japanese invasion. Foreseeing the vulnerability of Britain's Southeast Asian territories, Chapman proposed a bold plan to create stay-behind units comprising local Malays, Chinese, and Indians who could wage guerrilla warfare if Singapore fell. The British colonial governor, Sir Shenton Thomas, rejected the idea, calling it extravagant and defeatist. Chapman's fears proved prophetic. When the Japanese invaded in December 1941, he led an undercover raid across the Perak River that revealed crucial intelligence about the enemy's advantages, observing how the lightly equipped Japanese soldiers moved far more efficiently than the heavily burdened British and Indian forces. By early 1942, Singapore was teetering on the brink of collapse. Chapman didn't wait for official orders. He gathered a small team and disappeared into the Malayan jungle. He would carry out his guerrilla war himself. Immediately, Chapman and his comrades began an aggressive campaign of sabotage against the enemy. Often using homemade weapons, such as bombs crafted from gelignite hidden in bamboo sticks, they would carry out stealthy attacks against the Japanese troops and infrastructure in the area, with Chapman's expertise in living in the wild giving them the upper hand. The results were devastating. In their first 2 weeks of operations alone, they destroyed 15 railway bridges, derailed 7 trains, demolished 40 military vehicles, and by Chapman's own estimate, inflicted between 500 and 1,500 enemy casualties. Believing the force that perpetrated these actions to be made up of at least 200 commandos, rather than the small handful of guerrilla fighters they were in reality, the Japanese command deployed 2,000 troops to hunt them down. With the area now infested with enemy soldiers and supplies running low, Chapman and his men were now in serious danger. They planned to leave Malaya altogether, but escape proved impossible. Instead, they headed even deeper into the jungle, where they sought refuge with the communist rebels known as the Malayan People's Anti-Japanese Army, led by Chin Peng, who were also fighting a guerrilla campaign against the Japanese invaders. However, even with Chin Peng's protection, survival proved difficult. One by one, Chapman's comrades fell victim to enemy attacks and illness. Some team members became lost in the dense jungle, and search parties mounted to find them often ended in further casualties from Japanese gunfire. Before long, Chapman was the only member of his original team left alive. Meanwhile, any communication with Allied forces had been completely lost. Chapman had no choice but to go it alone with the communist guerrillas. Chapman's Allied comrades may have been gone, but that wouldn't stop his campaign of sabotage. Instead, he would train Chin Peng's men to help him carry out these dangerous missions. He taught them to whistle a British show tune called the Lambeth Walk for identification after dark, while he would announce his own presence with the call of a British tawny owl, a bird notably absent from the Malayan jungle. However, on several occasions, Chapman's operations were slowed down or completely brought to a halt by life-threatening tropical diseases. He suffered from malaria, beriberi, dysentery, and skin ulcers from leech bites. At one point, he spent 17 days in a semi-coma, fighting off a combination of tick typhus, blackwater fever, and pneumonia. What's more, continued skirmishes with the Japanese left him wounded twice, once in the leg and once in the arm. But despite these severe health problems, he adopted a philosophy that gave him the mental strength to survive. Summarized by his mantra, "The jungle is neutral." He later explained, "The role of a survivalist is to expect nothing and accept the dangers and bounties of the jungle as of a natural course." Hence, one's steady state of mind was of the utmost importance to ensure that the physical health of body and the will to live were reinforced on a daily basis. By keeping calm and taking the difficult situation in his stride, he was able to stay alive where his Allied comrades had not. Rather than allowing the jungle to defeat him, he instead took advantage of the opportunity to continue his scientific investigations. He would study local bird life and collect seeds that he planned to send to London's famous Kew Gardens Botanical Research Centre. This not only motivated him to keep going, but also allowed him to expand his knowledge of the region's flora and fauna, which would prove useful for his survival. Finally, after nearly 2 years of being completely cut off from the outside world, Chapman managed to re-establish contact with the British in late 1943. As a result, 2 operatives from Force 136, John Davis and Richard Broome, were sent to join him. However, during a mission to search for another missing British operative, disaster struck. Chapman was captured by the Japanese. Yet Chapman's spirit remained indefatigable. Even though he was seriously ill, he managed to slip away from their camp in the darkness, evading the sleeping guards. Nevertheless, he was forced to leave behind his detailed scientific diaries, which had been confiscated by his captors. Displaying characteristic audacity, upon his escape, he wrote directly to the Japanese Governor-General, requesting that if found, his observations be forwarded to the Royal Geographical Society in London. But Chapman's troubles weren't over. Continued Japanese attacks forced him, Davis, and Broome back into isolation among the communist guerrillas. Cut off from Allied forces once again, and with their only radio too damaged to use, they faced a new challenge, finding a way to re-establish contact with their headquarters. Despite all three continuing to suffer from various tropical illnesses by working with their guerrilla comrades, they were able to devise an ingenious solution to their communication problem. Using car batteries charged with a pedal dynamo and spare parts collected by the communist fighters, they gradually repaired their radio receiver and then their transmitter. Finally able to contact Allied headquarters in Colombo, they began coordinating supply drops and providing crucial intelligence about Japanese operations, turning their small band of survivors into a vital source of information for the Allied war effort. In early 1945, after 3 years of grueling jungle warfare, Chapman received word that the British S-class submarine, HMS Statesman, would attempt to rescue him along with Davis and Broome. But reaching the extraction point would mean an arduous trek from the mainland jungle to Pulau Pancor Laut, a small island off Malaya's west coast. The three men began their perilous journey through the dense rainforest, disguised as Chinese laborers to avoid attracting attention. Decades of studying local wildlife had taught Chapman how to move through the jungle without leaving traces, and his understanding of local customs proved invaluable as they traversed occupied territories. After reaching Pulau Pancor Laut, Chapman, Davis, and Broome swam out through the waters of Emerald Bay to rendezvous with the waiting submarine. When Chapman finally reached Ceylon in May 1945, he discovered he had been listed as missing and was presumed lost. At the British Embassy, he found a book about his previous travel exploits, written as though he were no longer alive. Even his car back in Britain had been sold. The man who had disappeared into the Malayan jungle in 1942 had become a ghost, but would now return a hero. For his exceptional courage, he was awarded the Distinguished Service Order, with a bar added to it later, joining several medals he had earned for his scientific and exploratory work. After the war, Chapman returned to life as an educator, establishing the King Alfred School in Plön, Germany, for children of British forces and Control Commission civilians. Yet his wartime experiences had left him with a myriad of health issues that worsened with age. In 1971, not wishing to burden his wife with the role of being his carer, he took his own life. However, Chapman would forever be remembered for his incredible acts of bravery and resistance. Comparing Chapman to Lawrence of Arabia, Field Marshal Earl Wavell would later write, "For sheer courage and endurance, physical and mental, the two men stand together as examples of what toughness the body will find, if the spirit within it is tough, and as very worthy representatives of our national capacity for individual enterprise." Today, Chapman's extraordinary life is commemorated at the Pancor Laut Island Resort, where his final escape from Malaya began. Each year, the resort hosts Chapman's Challenge, a biathlon that includes a jungle trek and swim, with Chapman's own descendants sometimes competing, and visitors can drink at Chapman's Bar in Emerald Bay, near where he swam out to HMS Statesman. Nearby, a black marble memorial displays a quote with his famous mantra, "The jungle is neutral,